Okay, so today I'm in Dublin with the interview. Everybody said I couldn't get, so I've got to thank a lot of people for persuading Marty Smyth. Thanks very much for agreeing to talk to us, Marty. So James Martin Smith, aka Marty Smith, a legend among poker players, the smartest of the smarts. Just two phrases you've been described as by your friends. You were the highest earning European poker player in 2007, which was multiple millions. Was there any, is there any history of poker playing in your family?
First of all, I like to know who described me as the smartest of the smarts.
AK.
Maybe he's being sarcastic. I've lost my laptop on a plane 7 times. The smartest of the smarts probably don't do that. That's true. I learned how to play poker, I suppose. I can't even really remember learning, but I sort of always knew how to play, so I must have learned pretty young as a kid. But it would have been very simple. Like, I would have known the rules of poker, the hand rankings, and we might have played 5-draw on family holidays or blackjack pontoon, as we would have called it back then. So I kind of, it feels to me like I've always known the rules of poker, if you know what I mean. Probably, I was asked this question just before the final table of the World Series in Vegas. They asked me how I got into poker, and I said that on family holidays when I was a kid, my dad would typically play with me and my brother, and this is when I was a young teenager, and he'd generally end up with all the money. He'd win all our spending money that we'd saved up over the year, and then he would give it back to us, but we had to promise we'd never gamble again. So this was him trying to teach us a lesson that gambling's bad. Obviously it had the complete opposite effect. So that was probably my earliest memory of actually playing poker for money, if you know what I mean, even though the money always came back at the end.
Okay, now some of the people that I've been lucky enough to interview and sort of meet or know through various things. One of them said, ask you how getting you to put all your money on a pair of twos and then hitting a two changed your life.
I wonder who that could have been. Look, yeah, Roland might say that's a bad beat, but we'll already split the money. This is heads up in the Irish Open. We're about 10 big blinds deep, and I'm supposed to stick all my money in with a pair of twos, and if he had the pair of twos, he was supposed to stick all his money in as well. So in some ways it's a 50-50, even though it sounds like a bad beat. And I got the trophy, which did help. I didn't really care too much at the time. I would win the trophy, we'd already split the money, and that was it as far as I was concerned. But retrospectively it did help. It got me a deal with Boyles, and that enabled me to travel around the world playing more tournaments, and I did pretty well over the couple of years since then.
Now, there's anyone that Googles your name, there's a fantastic photo of you sat behind a massive pile of money. I'm guessing that obviously it's for promotional purposes. You don't have to leave with that in a bag, but I mean the chips are still worth that amount of money. When you're playing, do you have to banish the thought of that as being worth that much?
No, not really. You have to take into account, when you're playing a poker tournament, you have to take into account what the jumps are in money, because it does affect how you play sometimes. So you need to be aware what the prize money is. But they do that in the World Series, I think, partly as a kind of gimmick, so that it looks good on TV, and also maybe adds a bit of pressure to the players. But I think most gamblers and most poker players are pretty degenerate at heart, and we've shattered any nerves we had about stuff like that, a long time before. So I certainly didn't feel any pressure when the money was on the table. I'm pretty sure the guy was playing heads up, Peter Jetton, didn't feel any pressure. He'd probably played cash games for bigger pots than that. The best thing about that photograph is if I'm ever stopped at airports now carrying cash, and they ask me why I'm carrying so much cash, I can show them that photograph on the phone. But it's not actually that much cash, this is, and usually gets me through.
Do they sort of have it sat there while you're playing then?
Yeah, it sits on the table. Just when you get to the last two, they pause play, bring it out in a wheelbarrow. I used to, I'm not sure, I haven't been down, made a final table in a long time in Vegas, but they carry it out actually in a wheelbarrow, set it on the table, and then you start playing again.
Tremendous. Now, this might be a bit of a personal question, but did you spend it frivolously or invest it wisely?
I certainly didn't invest it wisely. I spent some of it frivolously, and I invested some of it very unwisely, I would say. Like when I started playing poker, my family were understandably a bit worried about, I used to be a completely sick gambler in my teenage years, and, now I'm telling them that I'm actually gambling for a living, but don't worry, I'm good at this, I've got this under control. But they were always still a bit worried. So whenever I did get money together, I had a lot of people saying, well, you should put it away. You should do something safe with it, you know, buy a house or whatever. So when I won the big one in Vegas, I bought a house in 2008. Honestly, we completed it about a week before the property market crashed.
Oh.
So I lost about 50% on it. So that's where most of the money went. And yeah, I probably spent more than I should have. And I said yes to people who had stupid investment opportunities and stuff like that. With hindsight, I'd probably do a lot of it differently. But, you know, I came out of it okay in the end, I guess. And I certainly had a good time over all those years travelling around, spending money frivolously, yeah.
Now, you sort of touched on what I was going to ask next, but you're a Belfast boy. So you've already said that you were playing poker with your family, just, you know, sort of messing around a bit on holiday and stuff. You mentioned that you were already a bit of a degenerate gambler. So what were you betting on when you first started sort of betting?
I've been through it all. Like, I mean, I had very early memories of being on family holidays up in Portrush. Portrush is like the Blackpool of Northern Ireland, you know, and playing like penny slots. I'm sure I was in single digits, you know. Back then, there was no, like, I would have been in bookies in my school uniform as 13. You know, no one cared back then. So yeah, as long as I can remember, I was playing penny slots, playing cards with people at school for money, in the bookies at lunchtime after school. That's it, yeah. Probably until I was 18 or probably until I was 19, I would say I was a problem gambler. And then eventually it was actually slots. I worked at a flaw with a slot machine. And I went from being a problem gambler to making, I think the last year I did it, I made maybe 10 grand as a student in 1993 or 4. It was a lot of money for a student back then, you know. And that kind of cured me of the degeneracy, if you know what I mean, because I could still gamble. I was still getting that kind of gambling fix, but I had an edge. And around about the same time, I was playing in poker games and never thought of myself as a professional poker player, but I was making money playing poker, you know, and I think those two combined kind of enabled me to quit all the other stupid stuff that I was doing that I had no idea about, you know. And poker was a great educator as well, you know. It taught me how it works, and I could see what I was doing, you know, what I was doing wrong for all those years, just betting blindly on favourites and greyhounds and horses. And when you start playing poker and you realise it's all about getting value, and you know, betting when the odds are bigger than the probability dictates, and then you can apply that to gambling. So eventually I went full circle, got back into sports and horse racing, and eventually did very well at that.
Okay, so finding an edge with a fruit machine must have gone under the radar for quite a long time.
Yeah, it did. I eventually ended up barred from all these, and they were always very nice when they barred me, you know. Generally old ladies work in these places, and they'd say, look, I'm really sorry. They'd seen me in there losing money for years. They'd say, look, I'm really sorry, but you can't come in anymore. The boss has told me we can't serve you, you know. And didn't mind that, to be fair, but it was very satisfying. You know, it was like I'd won, you know, I'd beat the game, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Now you've said that you're obviously playing poker from a quite young age. The research I did, sort of just stalking you on the internet and stuff, it said you were playing for 4 years sort of seriously before turning professional.
I never turned professional as such. I didn't have a job to give up. You know, my last job I worked as a waiter in Pizza Hut while I was at university when I was 21. So it wasn't like I said, right, I'm going to quit the job and become professional. The big turning point, I guess, whenever I realised I was going to do this seriously was when internet poker started up. Pretty much everything I have now came from £100 deposit to Ladbrokes Poker. I think I might have had one deposit and spun it up and then earned it out, and then another £100, and everything took off from there. I think that month I made about 20 grand, which was probably more than I would have made in a year as a graduate. And I thought, well, like, I need to take this seriously. I didn't think it would last forever, but I thought, like, while I can make this money, you know, let's forget about university. I could always go back and finish my degree in a few years or whatever. But yeah, I didn't expect it to last this long, but it just got bigger and bigger every year, and that led to live tournaments. And so I guess it was around then that I became a professional poker player. But it wasn't like a conscious decision, if you know what I mean. Yeah,
one of your friends said that you were very good early on at the value of scaling up. So that's something that you consciously did, or did you look at somebody and think, I'm going to sort of emulate what they're doing?
Maybe, to be honest, that was probably because I had this bit of degeneracy in me, you know, and I always wanted to play the big games, and wanted to gamble for bigger stakes and that. And the big games weren't so big back then. Back in the early days of when I started playing in Ladbrokes, I think the biggest game was 2-4, no limit. So it wasn't a big game. Like a year later, they had like 50, 100. But you couldn't really play such big stakes that you could bust your whole bankroll in one night once you got a bit ahead. But then they introduced 5-10, then 10-20, and I always played in the biggest games with the best players, and that was a great educator. Probably wasn't great in terms of table selection. I would have been probably made more money short term playing in the smaller games instead of moving up and playing against the likes of Patrick Antonius and Julian Gardner and all the guys who were the top players back then. But long term, I think that made me more money because I learned a lot from playing against them.
Okay, now you're probably too young to remember, but when I was growing up, there was a program called Big Deal where the Robbie Box used to be gambling for a living, playing poker everywhere, but it's always a bit shady, and there's always like in a pub's back room, and there was a few dodge pots that you didn't really want to win off of. Was it anything like that at all when you first started?
Yeah, there was, but not really for me. There was a few games in Belfast I played, but they were friends, no one dangerous. Same with the casinos in Dublin. I mean, any poker game you go to, you're going to be playing against, the breakdown will be a few very rich businessmen or, B-list celebrities, and there'll be a few gangsters or drug dealers or criminals in there as well. It's the nature of the game. But I've never been in any hairy situations. Like, and everyone, even the dodgy guys are generally pretty honourable when it comes to poker.
Now, was poker something that you found you had sort of a natural aptitude for? Did you find it easy?
I think so, yeah. Like I was always very good with numbers. I always say to people I'm very smart in a couple of ways, but very stupid in pretty much every other way. But I was always good with numbers, and poker's about mathematics. I guess maybe the other skill I have is maybe good at interpreting what people think or manipulating people to think in certain ways, and that's what you need for poker. So yeah, I probably did have a bit of a natural talent for it. I certainly never put any work into it. I never read a poker book or studied the game, which is probably why I had to stop playing in 2010 because everyone else was doing that. But yeah, I would say probably did take to it quite naturally. Yeah.
So what is the number one skill needed to be successful?
Just what I said there. I mean, I'll tell you, this isn't a poker hand, but it's probably a good example of the skills that are required. My wife's sister had her 50th birthday not that long ago, and we were at the bar, and I can't remember why we had this bet. Maybe it was to see who went and got the next drink or something like that. But I said to my wife, "Look, let's play rock, paper, scissors for it." And so she's thinking about what she's going to do, and we had a few drinks, and me being the dickhead that I am, I got a bit cocky and I said, "I already know what you're going to do. You're going to go to the bar and get the drink. I know what you're going to do." And I whisper to her brother-in-law, I say, "I'll tell you exactly what she's going to do." And I whisper to him, and she goes, so we go, rock, paper, scissors, and she goes and gives me the finger. And that's exactly what I told the guy she was going to do. And we'd never done that before, but I could just see the way she was thinking, I'm being really cocky, and she thinks I'm an obnoxious dickhead, and she's going to give me the finger. And that kind of manipulation and reading of people is what poker's all about.